In this tutorial, we will use 4 simple steps to create an impressive graphical abstract in PowerPoint. Step 1 will be to download the free templates from Simplified Science Publishing using links in the video description box or the course description. Step 2 will be to choose a graphical abstract template. Step 3 will be to add designs and add data to the template. And step 4 is to export the graphical abstract for the scientific publications and presentations. So let's start with step 1, where you can go to the YouTube description box to go to this Simplified Science Publishing link to free graphical abstracts. And you can see that this gives you the option to add a free graphical abstract template to your bag, check out very briefly, email you these templates, and that's a great, easy way to get these free templates. Or if you've signed up for online courses through the Simplified Science Publishing dashboards, you can see that you have a link to these free graphical abstract templates and can also download them directly from your dashboard in the Simplified Science course and templates profile. And by downloading these templates, you can see that you get 3 figure files. One that is an Adobe Illustrator file with all of the templates that can be opened in Adobe Illustrator and Affinity Designer. And then 2 PowerPoint template files, one for Elsevier, which is a non-standard height and width, and one that is a standard 2-column figure width template, which many journals typically require as the max width for your graphical abstract. So for now, let's just open this PowerPoint file that is made for a 2-column figure. And you can see that this file contains many different graphical abstract templates. Some that are made with just 1 panel designs, where you'll have 1 main description, 2 panel designs, 3 panel designs, 4 panel designs, and unique designs such as timelines, diagrams, Venn diagrams, and all of these can be used to customize your own graphical abstract information by customizing the text and adding your own illustrations, images, and graphs to these files. And just as an example, I'll pull up the Elsevier file and just let you know that this is a much wider and narrower graphical abstract requirement from these Elsevier journals. So this contains exact same style of templates, but using the height and width required by the journals. And we'll go into a little bit more about how you determine the final height and width of your file as we do this example and this tutorial today. We are now ready for step 2 of the design process, where we will choose one of these templates to best design our graphical abstract that shows and highlights our scientific data best. And in order to choose which one of these we will be using, I recommend you first draft your ideas on pen and paper to see how many panels or what kind of design style you may need from the templates. So for this tutorial, I want to create a graphical abstract brainstorm that shows a fake research study on how a conditional knockout of Conn's mRNA in neuroblasts inhibits neuron development in Drosophila melanogaster, which is a fruit fly. And the goal will be to show a section showing the methods using this mRNA knockdown, the phenotype resulting from this conditional knockout, and then a graph of the results of the study. So I will want to create a design that shows 2 to 3 panels in this abstract design. So as we go back to the templates, I want to look at these 2 panel designs. And I like this one quite a bit. It's simple, it's nice, and has 2 sections that I can fill out. 3 panels might also be a good option because I have 3 different sections, although I don't want them to be arrows. They're not really leading to one another. I want them to just be 3 separate sections. And the best graphical abstracts are often the most simple design. So I think I will go ahead and choose just a 2-panel design where I will describe the conditional knockout with illustrations on the left, and then show the analytical data using an Excel graph on the right. So with the template selected, the next thing I need to do is create a copy that will become my graphical abstract draft because I don't want to edit my template file. So I will go to File, Save As. I will then create a logical name, which for me will just be to call this a graphical abstract example, and make sure you put it in a logical folder with a descriptive title and press save. And now I'm going to delete all of the panels above and all of the panels below so that I can just have my single graphical abstract file to begin my draft. And the other thing I want to point out is that you will want to double check what your journal requires for their graphical abstract formatting. This is set as a fairly standard 2-column figure width which most journals require. But as I mentioned before, Elsevier has their own unique dimensions required. So you're going to want to look it up online, double check from the journal's website what are the graphical abstract requirements. And if they're not a 2-column figure width, you may want to go to File, Page Setup, and take whatever height and width that are recommended by your journal and adjust the height and width here so that the final format of whatever you are creating in your graphical abstract doesn't have to be reformatted when you submit it to your desired journal. So just keep that in mind. It's very helpful to have these settings at the very beginning, where again, this is 180 millimeters roughly width in inches. You can use online tools to translate pixels or millimeters or whatever the required format is into inches and adjust it in your PowerPoint page setup to ensure the proper formatting in your design. We are now in step 3 of the design process, where we need to add the illustrations and data. I recommend using a mix of 3 methods for this. Method 1 is to download customizable images and template designs that have appropriate copyright rules. Method 2 is to draw your own illustrations. And method 3 is to import and optimize graphs from software such as Excel, GraphPad Prism, and others. We are going to go through examples of each one of these as part of today's tutorial, starting with how to download customizable images. To find customizable images, you can search for and download images from the internet as long as they have copyright rules that allow you to use them for your designs. And there are things like iStock that do have purchasable designs that you can download and use in PowerPoint. But I often find that these are too cheesy for scientific publications. So I'm going to use the Simplified Science Publishing Image Database, where there is a biological diagram bundle with 270 vector images for both Adobe Illustrator and in PowerPoint that have a lot of useful images that I can then download and use in my PowerPoint designs. So if I go to my downloaded biological diagram drawings and open that PowerPoint file, I can see that I have a lot of cellular backgrounds that I may want to use. But what I really want to go for are my DNA and CRISPR-Cas9 molecules, where there are a couple options here in the template. There are this gray, blue, and red template, which is quite nice. So I'll go ahead and copy and paste this on a new slide. I'm going to duplicate this slide and sort of have some draft assets on a second slide. So I'll paste those here. Those could be a nice way to represent the CRISPR-Cas RNA. I also have, let's see, I also have the other files that I might use, such as this CRISPR-Cas system, or I could even use these individual elements here. So I'll just kind of bring all the options that are relevant from the template into this file and consider using these for my designs. And as I'm looking at these, I also want to realize that I don't have to use images. I can also be doing some of these drawings myself. So for me, the most relevant image that I may want to mimic is this that shows a target mRNA, a gRNA that's targeting this mRNA, and then that mRNA's degradation. So on this left, I could see this being a great way to represent that Cas9 method of targeted degradation of a target mRNA. But I'm also going to show you today that this image is great and does the job, but you can also use the shapes in PowerPoint itself to draw those illustrations. So method 1 is to download the illustrations, and method 2 is to draw your own designs using the PowerPoint text, shape, and icon tools. And your version of PowerPoint may not look exactly like mine, but you will be able to find the exact same tools if you have version 2019 or above. And they just may not be in this exact order on the menu, but the exact same options will exist if you look at all your possible menu options. Let's start with the text tools. So the templates have text within shapes or as separate text boxes. And all you need to do is double click on each of these templated texts and replace it with your own text. And if you want to add new text that is not currently already on the shapes or text boxes in the templates, you want to find the text box option and click on it to turn it on, and either just click once to get a new default text box. Be aware though that this text automatically inserts itself as Calibri font, which is the default Microsoft font, and most journals require Arial or Helvetica. So you're going to want to do some edits there as far as what text format you want to use. Just make sure you follow the journal requirements for the graphical abstract. And you can also insert text boxes knowing, let's say I knew I wanted to fit a specific paragraph of text right in this area. You can also fill out text here. Again, highlight, change the font type, change the font size. 9 is a good internal text. And if you have it with a specific size, you can see it will automatically adjust and go to the next line if you've created a full text box that you add text to. So those are the tips and tricks for using text in PowerPoint. And I'm going to go ahead and just start to fill out all of these with the text that matches my original brainstorm concept. And now that I've updated the abstract text, I will review how to add designs in PowerPoint using icons, 3D models, and shapes. And to go to this menu, I recommend going to Insert to see that you have this Icons, 3D models, and shapes in your menu. And if I click on icons, you will see a menu appear, and this is in 2019 and above, where there are a lot of good icons that you may consider using. Some are animal icons, so if you wanted to use the PowerPoint mouse icon, you could. It's not exactly as professional as I may want for scientific purposes, but it can still do a good job if this is sort of the cost-efficient method you want to use to add mice, to add arrows, and there really is a lot of options, including some chemical and medical related designs. So there could be some good designs that can save you time for representations of hospital beds, representation of some medical, syringes, etc. There's also representations of body parts in here. So again, it's an interesting idea if you're looking to minimize cost but have some people illustrations and or mouse illustrations. You can adjust the color of these icons, but that's about it. Know that they're not that customizable. If you wanted to be using, different colors for just the fill, you can really only change the color of these, which is useful depending on what kind of graphical abstract you're trying to design. And another interesting option I want to show you is that you can also insert 3D models. Now, these 3D models are quite complex, and there's some interesting ones when it comes to science-related design, such as the chemistry and anatomy designs. And let's say you were doing a lung illustration or liver, you can insert a 3D model, adjust even the angle. So especially if you have an interesting angle of an organ that you're trying to represent, the 3D models can be a really great way to have just that image in the right angle appear. And you can use these for scientific papers as long as you reference Microsoft as the source of this image within this graphical abstract. You cannot use these for commercial projects, but for scientific publication, they will allow you to use it with reference to Microsoft. So that's another way to add designs to your graphical abstract. And then the one I want to talk about today is one that I think is most customizable, which is you can insert shapes and make symmetrical drawings just using the basic shapes provided here, which you can also use these sort of scribble or even draw tools to create shapes. But I don't recommend drawing your own shapes for scientific purposes because a lot of times you want them to be perfectly symmetrical and smooth, which is why I prefer using shapes when I'm drawing in PowerPoint. And this I'm going to use as an example in this graphical abstract today. So what I want to represent using shapes is I want to represent an example of the control developing neurons pathways, in Drosophila melanogaster, and then the phenotype of what it looks like for the cell types developed in this Conn's conditional knockout. So I will start by creating my cell types using a basic circle shape, this oval, and if I use no shift, I can draw an oval, but if I want it to be a perfect circle, an easy trick is to hold shift. And while I scale up and down while holding shift, this will create a perfect circle. So I'll go ahead and create 3 perfect circle shapes because in Drosophila, there's a very standardized developmental model where a large ganglion mother cell gives rise to a bunch of neuroblasts, which then give rise to neurons. And these form a very classical structure in the fruit fly. But for my first step, I'm going to want to just change the color of these cells to represent 3 different cell types. And I'm going to want to choose colors that match the rest of the color scheme here. And I don't want to add too many colors. One of the best things for scientific color design is to limit yourself to no more than 3 colors to highlight whatever it is you're trying to show. And if you click on the shapes you've created, you can change the fill of these colors by changing to a theme color, a standard color, or you can even choose more colors and choose from this rainbow and adjust the darkness and the lightness and the opacity. But what I'm going to show you is a trick that I like to use, which is if you have a predefined color palette, you can easily choose colors to make quick designs and maintain the same color scheme. So let me show you what I mean. In the biological diagram templates that you can download from Simplified Science Publishing, there are these predefined color schemes with bright, dark, and background colors. And each of these sets, so this set at the top, is already designed so that it's not going to conflict for people with color blindness. If you use any 3, let's say I didn't want to use the bright yellow, but I could use the teal, the blue, and the red color. Those won't conflict with color blindness. I have a blue and orange and purple color palette that also won't conflict with color blindness, and so on. So keep in mind, this is a great way to have a predefined color palette, and I am going to use this by using copy, create a new slide here, delete everything on this new slide, and paste. And with this, I can now choose some of these colors, and the most obvious choice for me will be to use the blue, orange, and purple color palette because I already have purple and blue. And again, the best designs limit the choice of color so that you're only using 3 colors and maybe 2 colors in gray to highlight the main points of your research. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this whole color palette, which I'll keep for reference. I will paste it actually onto my design, and I will right click to see the menu and then crop it so that I really just have my own little color palette here. And obviously you don't have to use the color palette I just showed you. This is just easiest way for me to have color palettes that won't have any color blindness issues, and also already have a wide range of colors for my own gradients that I want to be creating with these cell types. But you can also be looking at the internet to also find your own color palettes, or like I said before, using the more color tools to create your own color palettes. But now that we have the colors I want to use for these cell types, I'm going to go ahead and start to adjust them where each of these cells will have a shape outline. So more colors, I'm going to select an outline color that's a darker blue. I'm also going to format that color. So if you want to be formatting more elements, keep in mind that the format shape is the menu you're going to want to have open. I'll click out these other two so that it's easier than trying to find it on this top menu bar when you just have a right click, see what your menu options are, and adjust it here, where the line has that dark color I gave it, but I'll actually make it a width of 0.5 points, so a little thinner. And for the inside, this color, what I want is for cell types in scientific designs, you often want a gradient. So I'm actually going to choose this gradient tool, turn it on, and this is not the gradient colors I want, but what you can see in the format shape menu is that it gives me options to add gradient colors. I'm going to use the select and then minus tool to delete the middle, and then I'm going to select this color that's on the inside, and I'm actually going to make that color one of the more faint blue colors, and I could choose the faint one by using this eyedropper tool to just hover over, and I might even choose one from this gradient that's already selected over here. So I'll have that gradient center light color. I'll click on this outer color to then click on more colors and get that gradient to be a brighter blue. And that's looking really nice. That looks like a nice color that will match the overall color design well. And I could even, if I wanted to, take more colors, and to make it a little more in line, I can even pull colors from my drawing on the left. So actually, I think I'll change my plan and have it be a nice bright blue color that then ties in the color from my design on the left. So that can be my ganglion mother cell, which is going to give rise to some more cell types over here. And I'm going to do the same color outline as I did on this cell, just to have some continuity. So I can use the recent color. I'm going to change this to 0.5 for the width of the line on the outside. And then for the shape fill, I can go to this menu or this top menu to see the options. And yeah, actually, you can see, you can click on gradient fill here, or again, you can go to this top menu, have gradient fill here, and choose the preset gradient with the center gradient. And this time I'm going to make this cell a little darker than the cell on the right. So I'm going to take this center color, click on it, more colors, and I'll have this be a darker blue. Maybe that's a little too dark. So I'll go back, do more colors, select a slightly less intense blue. And it's still looking almost too similar. So what I might even do is go back and adjust this previous cell to be a lighter color. I like that, so that it shows a distinct change in the colors, a lighter cell to a darker cell, and this is going to be the ganglion mother cell to a neuroblast that then gives rise to the neurons. So neurons are the center of this story, and I could make them purple to perfectly align with this other illustration. But what I actually want to do, I think I want to use this orange because they're the main character of this story. So I want them to stand out. So I will change the line of this to be a darker orange. I'm going to make everything consistent. That will be 0.5 width. And then I'm going to want to change that shape fill to a gradient. I'm going to change the preset direction to a center gradient. And now I'm going to change this to the orange colors. So I'll take that light color and instead make it a light orange color. And I'll take this dark outer blue color and make it a brighter orange. And this looks too light, so I am going to just make this a slightly darker orange. And I could be pulling this from a gradient on the left, or these panel colors that are without gradients. And I like that quite a bit. So this is a good bright orange that will make the neurons stand out. And it is a good color design where they're easily distinguishable from each other. So I feel pretty good about this. Maybe one other final edit is to make this one even lighter in the center. And I also want to use this as an opportunity to show you that yes, you can select pre-selected color palettes using the eyedropper tool. But let's say I just want to make this color lighter. Know that you can always be using the map or this little slider. If you just want to make the same color tone a little lighter or a little darker, don't be afraid to use this slider tool. And you can see even there, just that little adjustment brightened it up and made it even more distinguishable between the two cell types. Okay, so good color design is in place. Now let's get to organizing these, where I'm just going to copy paste, have 4 ganglion mother cells. And this is also a good point just to let you know that in fruit fly development, the cells actually have a very stereotypical developmental pattern where one ganglion mother cell gives rise to a bunch of neuroblasts. And what I did was I made these two align in the same area and these two cells align in the same area. And now what I want is to use my align tools to arrange and distribute them evenly. So there's equal distance between the 4 of these cells. And what you can see is that that created a very nice symmetrical drawing. One of the ways that can help you stand out if you're drawing in PowerPoint is to have highly symmetrical drawings using the arrange and align tools to really finesse your final designs. And now we have the neurons, where there's going to be a lot of neurons arising from these neuroblasts. And I'm just going to go ahead and start to roughly make my first row of neurons, just aligning and distributing them equally, seeing if I like their design. I do like this, so I'm just going to take this row and paste it, this row and paste it, and paste it. And I'm going to next have these cells align perfectly center, but in order to do that, I need to group them so that I can use the align tools to make it easy. So I'm going to select these 4 cells and I'm going to right click and group them. You can also be using the shortcut. In this case on a Mac, it's a Command Shift G, but also know that you can hold Shift while clicking on objects, right click and just get the group. You can also highlight over the objects, right click and group. So multiple ways you can be selecting cells in a way that works best for you. And now without even doing anything else, I can select all of these cell types that I want to have arranged and put a line and align them to the middle. So this is aligning them directly in the middle, and I want to maybe drag them so that they form the stereotypical developmental pattern for fruit flies. And I'll evenly arrange these so that they have equal spacing between each of those rows. And now we have a really nice symmetrical representation of this control group of cells. Now, for this cons conditional knockout, which is completely made up, cons does not exist, but I'm going to make up the phenotype that in this conditional knockout, we inhibit neuron development. So there's going to be fewer neurons. So I need to go back and select all of these neurons, ungroup them, and I can begin to delete some of them so that there's fewer neurons. And the phenotype of this will also be that they sort of have a discombobulated developmental pattern. So this is coming together, that the control, and I'll go ahead and bold this text. I kind of want this control and conditional knockout text to stand out. But now we have great representations of the developmental model on the left. So the method and the model and the phenotype on the right. There's still some final adjustments I want to do. So I'm going to group this whole set, going to group, make sure I select them all when I group this whole set, and I want to center these so that they're evenly aligned. And one thing I'm already noticing is that there's a lot more white space on the top and the bottom of my design, and I don't really want to increase the size of these. They're big enough. So what I might do is even just pull this entire illustration up a bit. And what I can do is I can, at the end, crop the size of my slide so that I'm not taking up any more space than I need to tell the scientific story. So that can happen by going to File, Page Setup. And this is set where I don't want to change the width because this is already set for a 2-column figure, but I can adjust the height, and maybe I'll just bring it in 0.3 inches. And I don't want to scale my drawings. I want them to stay the same. Be aware that it only looks like it took off the bottom, but if you look at the top shape, it centered it. So we are going to want to do a few adjustments. We're going to want to pull all of these elements down to align at the bottom, and then make sure that we align the title to the top. And that looks pretty good. So I've shortened it just so there's less white space. I've realigned the shape element so that they're touching the edges. And I can do my final organization here so that there's just enough white space, not too much and not too little. And before I go into inserting an Excel graph and formatting that graph using only PowerPoint and Excel tools, I did want to point out that using the shapes, I only use the circle, but there are a lot of different shape options, and you can use these to create a lot of different types of complex scientific designs. You can even try to recreate this design on the left by using a series of lines and aligning them in circles. And you can make some customized shapes, I just want to point out, using some of the edit shape tools. So let's say I didn't want a perfectly symmetrical cell. I can select Edit Points, and then it allows you to see the points of the shape you create. And let's say I was working with a cancer cell diagram and I wanted to create a non-standard, non-symmetrical shape. You can adjust the cells and or each vector point here. It's just, you can't control it as easily as you can in vector editing tools like Affinity Designer and Adobe Illustrator. So I don't recommend doing this unless you are very in need of an asymmetrical design, or you're very careful about which vector points you design. But those are some other options, and you can go a long way with shapes and PowerPoint to create your own custom designs. All right, but for now, we'll use this nicely formatted pre-exported image, and we're now going to want to go into inserting a graph that describes these results using Excel data. So let's jump into Excel, where I'm going to show you the fake data for neuroblasts, ganglion mother cells, and neuron cell counts that have already been pre-calculated with their averages for each experiment, with their standard deviation, and with their t-test. And what I want to point out is that if I'm just using the standard custom graph in Excel that's chart design, add a bar chart, you will get a result that looks something like this. And unfortunately, this is not a very well-designed chart that's good enough for publication. There's a lot of adjustments that you can do, and in fact, it only takes about 5 to 10 minutes of control clicking to get from this chart to this chart. And this is just using every tool in Excel. This is adding line elements and some text box elements to make it an even more engaging design. But I'm going to show you how to get from this standard graph to this graph in Excel right now. So let's start by making a copy of this chart. And what I recommend you do is, even if your Excel format does not look exactly like mine is a 2019 version, everything I'm about to show you is in your version of Excel as well. It just may not be in the exact same layout or menu, but it exists. And how I recommend finding the menus to start editing is to start by right-clicking each of the individual elements. So I'm going to start left to right, and right now I've right-clicked on the axis. You want to be looking for anything that says Format. So if I click on the Format axis, I can see the menu options to change the minimum and maximum bounds. And what I want to say is that I see that I may want to change the minimum just so that I can highlight some of these differences that are highly significant. So I might change the minimum bound to be 30 instead of 0, even a bit more. What if I did 40? And that's looking much clearer as far as showing the differences between each of these experimental groups. I'm also going to change this because there's 3 decimal places showing. I want to go ahead and just make it 0 decimal places. So that changed that .000 decimal places. And before I finish leaving the axis here on the left, I also want to change the font to Arial or Helvetica. Almost all journals require Arial or Helvetica font. And I'm also going to increase their size so that they're easier to read. And that's already looking much better for the left part of my chart. The next thing I want to start clicking on are the bars themselves. So if I right-click and click Format Data Series, and it already showed up in my Format menu, but if you don't see the Format menu, always just right-click all of the elements. And the first thing I almost always change is gap width. I change it to 100%. Sometimes I change it to 50%, but 100% is a great place to start. And already they're just looking a little bit better as far as my bar chart is concerned. And these, I don't want to change too much else at the moment. Their color, I could start to change. And this is a question of color design that is very important. If you have only 2 groups, like a wild type and a conditional knockout, you're rarely going to want to use more than 2 colors. And you aren't going to want to use different colors that make every bar a different color, because that's hard for your audience to see. And you don't even have to use colors to make the scientific story clear. So what I want to show you is that gray can be a very effective graph color tool, where if I change all of these actually to no line and just change the fill to a light gray, and then change either the control or the conditional knockout to a darker gray, you can already see that it's very easy to tell these two groups apart. Now I'll say this is maybe too light of a color. I'll bring it up to 1 notch up from the gray theme colors. But already it's very easy to tell the difference between controls and conditional knockout in a way that makes the data stand out without even using any colors. And next, I'm going to start to add some of the other details that aren't immediately obvious in Excel, such as the standard deviation. Now, standard deviation bars, if you click on a chart design menu, you'll have to look at add chart element, then find error bars, and then find the standard deviation. And this can vary where you find this on different versions of Excel, but it's always somewhere nestled away and many clicks away. You just have to find it. And I'm going to click on this. I see the format error bar show up again. Now I could right click to format error bars from the menu. And what you want to make sure you do is that you change this from the standard deviation to a custom so that you can specify the plus and minus values to those that are actually related to your data. And that will now add the standard deviation. And for now, because these are bar charts, I'll just have the plus represented on my chart. So already this is looking like a much better graph. I'm going to go ahead and size it by pulling it in. It doesn't need to take up as much space as I had it. And we're already getting closer to a very well-designed chart. I'm going to go ahead and delete the title because that's unnecessary. And I could start to add and adjust the labels by clicking on them and editing them. But what I'm already finding is that this is a lot of text and it's a lot of repeated text. So anytime you have a lot of repetitive text, such as the wild type written 3 times and the concio written 3 times, this is a great time to use a legend instead of relying on this sort of pre-formatted from my data text. There are 2 ways to add legends to your Excel chart, and one way is to go to your chart design, add chart element, and add a legend. But sometimes this isn't exactly what you want. As you can already see, they chose everything, and you may want to adjust what they choose for this by adjusting what is highlighted for your data. But that can become really annoying to rely on all this automated formatting. Often there are things I would rather do myself to customize the legends. So instead of relying on this automated text, what I'm going to do is actually delete this legend. And I'm even going to delete this text below. And I prefer to add all of my text elements in black, not gray, myself, separate from the graph. So there's a few things I need to do if I want to format my data this way without relying on automated text and legends, which is, first, I want to remove the outer border of this graph. So no line on the border. Again, I just right-clicked this chart to see these options in my format chart area. I then want to create a bigger working space within Excel to be adding my own elements around this graph. So by default, Excel has gray lines in each cell, but you can change that by making sure the border color selected as white, and then with the border color selected as white, you can highlight whichever cells you want to be surrounding your graph, then go to all borders, and now you'll see that the borders were transformed from the default gray to white borders, and we now have a nice clean open canvas to begin to edit the legend and the labels in whatever way we want. So the first thing to do will be to insert some shapes because I want to add 2 squares. I held Shift while entering the square, I'm going to click on this to see my format shape options. And I'm going to first go to the shadow and remove the shadow. I don't want a shadow and I don't want a line. I just want this to have a solid fill that matches the control color, and then copy and paste another square that matches my wild type color, or my conditional knockout color, pardon me. So now I have two boxes that I can put wherever I want for my legend. And I'm going to want to start to add some text. So I can also insert a text box. So I can click once to get a text box, and I can label this my wild type, or I'll just call this a control. So control, and keep in mind you are going to have to edit this to be consistent with whatever font your scientific journal requires. But that's going to be the control, copy, paste. This is going to be the cons conditional knockout. And this is also helpful because the cons in this case is an mRNA conditional knockout. So I want to italicize part of it. That's also the value of adding your own custom text, is that you don't have to rely on editing the automated text. You can have full control over the design by adding text boxes and shapes. So this is already looking pretty good. It's a good legend. I might hold shift while I move these a little closer, align them, and things are looking quite good. The next thing I'm going to want is to have more text on the other parts of my diagram to show that this section is the ganglion mother cell. And I'll increase the font to 14, make that stand out a little bit. These are the neurons. Oh, pardon me, these are the neuroblasts. And these are the neurons. And I'm already, before I get too far in formatting, going to have this graph take up less space. I already know that in my final design, I don't want to take up more space than is necessary. So before I get too far in formatting, I'm going to change the size to match what I know I want it to be. And I'm going to add a few more elements. I'm going to insert shapes and line, because it's hard to tell that these are grouped. So I'm going to add a line, hold shift to keep it perfectly vertical or in 45-degree segments. And again, we have to remove the shadow every time we add a shape in Excel, at least in this version of Excel. I'm going to change the width to 1 point. I'm going to change the color to the color of the current lines, which I'm just using this eyedropper tool to pull the exact same color of the current line. And you can see that formats really well. It matches the design. I'm going to make this a little shorter, hold shift so I don't accidentally create an angle. I'm going to copy and paste and create another line that just starts at the bottom. Copy and paste, create another line. And this just makes it really easy to see the separation of the groups. And I'm going to create, copy and paste, and rotate 90 degrees by holding shift. I'm going to label my axis because these are cell counts. And we're looking so much better already. So this is turning out to be a really nice looking graph. I may choose to have the bars be a little thicker. So maybe closer to 70%. And I'm really liking how this looks. And I'm ready to add one more element, which are the significance bar labels. There are other graphing tools that make adding significance bars much easier than Excel. When it comes to adding significance bars in Excel, unfortunately, you do have to go the manual route of using shapes to insert lines And the first line I'll add is I'm going to hold Shift and add a perfectly horizontal line. And I'm going to remove the shadow and make it a black line that is 1.5 width. I want it to be a little thicker than the error bars. And this will represent my non-significant line. I can press copy and paste and make this another line that is perfectly vertical. You want the width at 0 to be perfectly vertical. Put another line, copy paste, and just add your series of lines, adjusting the height. Hold Shift as you're adjusting the height if you want it to maintain the same angle. And again, I want these perfectly vertical and perfectly horizontal. And it takes a little bit of work. You can zoom in just to make sure you are connecting each of these in a way that isn't awkward, and that they meet up. And these are looking pretty good. I'm going to want this guy a little more to the right. I can just be careful what you're adjusting. I accidentally adjusted the graph there. And eventually, you should be able to just align them well enough that you can copy and paste a whole group to the next graph side. Sometimes it takes a second with Excel for it to format. Press Escape, Shift to pull this point down and a little less. Hold Shift and move this whole bar set over. Move this bar set over. And Excel isn't really built for shapes, so I'm able to get the job done, but I will say that using software like Adobe Illustrator, Affinity Designer, or even PowerPoint to add some of these elements can go a long way in making it much easier for you to format without having some of these slightly off and having to really by eye adjust the formatting of each point. Again, holding Shift, pressing Escape. If you're not able to click on any next item, press Escape. That will get you out of sort of your sticky points in Excel. And you have to be a little patient, but eventually you can get these to a place that look pretty good by just using Excel tools. And if I zoom out, look at my graph thus far, it's looking pretty good. I will say in the end, I'm not a huge fan of the 1.5. I might just use 1 point font, and that looks even better. So 1 point font is better than the 1.5, given what I have for my current line widths. Be aware that each time you do a change in the width, unfortunately, just because of how Excel works, you are going to have to do some more subtle adjustments on the line locations. With a little patience, you can get there. Great. So these look pretty darn good. And the final element that I see missing on my graph is that I do want some labels. So the significant labels. So I want to insert a couple more text boxes, starting with a non-significant label, still using Arial, and 11-point font will be fine. I want it to be smaller than my other label font. This difference between this 2 bars, if I look at my data, is going to be 1 star, and then this third data set is going to be 3 stars. So depending on the decimal points in your significance, this will be 1 star significant difference. And Just make sure you're grabbing the right elements. 3 stars, significant difference. And the final step to formatting this Excel graph is that depending on where I'm going to place it, I can choose to export this in a couple different ways. If I'm going to move this directly into something like Adobe Illustrator, I could actually just select all of the elements and copy paste it in there, but ideally I would have just waited to add these elements in Adobe Illustrator if I was using Adobe Illustrator, so I could add all of these significance bars in Adobe Illustrator where it's much faster. But for if you're going to use something like PowerPoint for your figures or something where you just want this to be a static image, the fastest trick I recommend using is a screenshot or by using your snipping tool. So on a Mac, if I use Command-Shift-4, I get this cursor and I can actually just choose the area of the graph and export this as an individual image. If you are using a different tool, such as a Macintosh, a Windows PC, you're going to want to use the snipping tool, which does the exact same function. But this saves this as an image, and I can then send that image and or import that image to wherever I'm adding my figures, such as PowerPoint. To insert the Excel graph into my PowerPoint graphical abstract, I want to find my screenshot, which is just in my desktop folder, and I can just drag and drop it into my PowerPoint file, hold Shift and size it down to maintain the proportions, hold Shift and size it back up. I'll delete this extra text. And I now am ready to do some final formatting because it looks pretty good, but there are a few things I'm noticing that I want to update to make this a perfectly formatted final graphical abstract. And that is that this is a left and right panel with 2 different sections labeled, but it's not looking like 2 different sections to the eye. It kind of all blurs together. So what I want to do is I want to first add a shape that's going to be the background shape for this right side, and I'm going to remove the line. I'm going to send it to the back. I can send it to the back using my menu at the top, but I can also change that order by going to a right click and sending to back or using the shortcuts. So there's lots of options here. And I want this to take on a color that makes sense for the color scheme. So I'm going to change the fill color to more colors, eyedropper tool, and I'll start by just pulling this blue, and because I already know these 2 colors go very well together. But I'm not liking now that this is the same color here. I want to make this more clear that these are 2 separate sections. So I'll end up changing this fill color for the label to a color that matches the unique color over here, which is purple, and just pick a nice light purple color. That was too light, so I'll pick another one that's a little brighter, and that looks great. Now it's much more clear that this is a left purple and neuron color, which I could make this orange as well, but for me, I really want the neurons to stand out, so I'll keep that as is. And now there's a better left and right, which is easier for the eye, but the graph still isn't perfectly going to be formatted. So there are some things I can do though. The first thing I want to do is notice that there's this white space to the right that doesn't match my design. So I can copy and paste this graph, right click, and then crop it, because I'm just going to remove the legend from this top image and have this represent the graph to fill the space. And I'm going to take this image, crop it, so that all I have are these legend elements, that I can even go one step further and crop it so there's right click, crop, just the control, right click, crop, just the conditional knockout, And I can have these be represented on the bottom. I could also recreate these and align these a little bit better if I even just recreated the shape and text box elements in PowerPoint. But that looks pretty good. And to make this cohesive, I will need one more shape behind that's going to be no line and just a white shape, where this arrange, send to back, this arrange, send to back, and playing with those layers, I now have a graph that stands out and fits the space without having too much awkward white space in places that just don't make it feel right to the eye. So that's a great looking graph. Again, just formatting and grouping and moving these until they're centered, because a nice aligned and centered file is a feel-good thing for the eye. And this is now complete. I think the only thing I may consider adding are some text labels. It's not very clear to an audience who's not familiar with Drosophila development, with fruit fly development, what cell types these are. So I'm going to do one final step where I insert some shapes. I'm going to insert while holding Shift these lines. They're going to be black lines. I like the 0.5 width, and I'm going to just make them a little longer so that as somebody who may not be very familiar with the development of the Drosophila fruit fly, send to back, align so they're all aligned on the same point here. I'm going to add a few more labels using the same font size I used over here so that your audience can make the right association with the cell types shown in the phenotype that then match the cell type counts on the right. So those are the neuroblasts, and those are the neurons. And unlike Excel, you can actually do a much easier job in PowerPoint of arranging and aligning your lines. So it may be something where you want to do some of your final formatting, including the significant bars, in PowerPoint instead of in Excel, just to make sure you have everything perfectly aligned in ways that make you happy. After you finish formatting, then you're ready for the final step, which is to export this graphical abstract for your presentations and posters. And most scientific journals require graphical abstracts in a PDF or TIFF format, so we'll start with that. And I'll go ahead and just delete my extra slide, so I just have one slide, and I'll go to File, Export, and the first format offered is a PDF, so you have really no options to change the settings here. If you want to save it as a PDF, you can just click Export and it will export as a PDF. If you want to export this as a TIFF, you go to File, Export, and choose the format TIFF, and just make sure it's in a folder you can find again. And you will likely not get this width and height that I have shown here. You'll probably have something closer to in the 700s if you've never exported your PowerPoint files for publication before. So just know that you should never rely on the standard width and height when you're trying to export something for publication, because you're going to want it to be at a much higher resolution than the default numbers given. And I recommend just changing the width to 2000 and letting the height automatically adjust to the right ratio, and save the current slide only. In this case, we could save every slide, but there's just one graphical abstract to save. And by putting that width at 2000 and exporting, we're ensuring that this TIFF file is going to be a high enough resolution that it's going to be good for publishing. So again, change that to 2000 and export for a nice high-resolution file. And for presentations, I recommend going to File, Export, and choosing PNG, and still saving at a width of 2000 so that it's a high-resolution PNG file that can go onto your slides. And just be aware that if the PNG or TIFF file is too large or is hitting a maximum file size for some reason that you can't upload to your scientific journal, you can't fit on your slides, which is very rare, but it can happen, you can also consider continually lowering this width, letting the height adjust automatically, and this will also reduce the file size. But start with 2000 or a little higher, just so that you can start with a high resolution file to see if it's not too large of a file to add it to your slides or to upload it for your scientific publication. The graphical abstract tutorial for PowerPoint is now complete. Thanks for watching and have a great day.